Hey guys, tonight we descend somewhere few storytellers dare linger, a place so monotonous, so heavy with repetition that it could lull even the most caffeinated mind to sleep. We're going down to the Greek underworld, but not for the fiery drama you might expect. No, tonight you're here for the boring parts, the slow grinding eternities, the punishments that never change, the drip, drip, drip of fate that hums like a cosmic white noise machine. You probably won't survive this if you're hoping for action, but if you want to drift into dreams to the rhythm of endless futility, well, you've found your place. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean, I'll never know, but Hades might. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious to see who's listening from which corner of the living world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a landscape that isn't really land at all. It's more like memory, the way a dream remembers geography. The air hums, thick with minerals and sorrow. Ahead lies the River Styx, the black artery that divides the world of breathing from the world of sighing. The Greeks imagined death not as a door but a crossing, and the ferryman, Charon, as its grumpy toll collector. You can almost hear him clearing his throat, paddle resting on his knee, waiting for a coin pressed under your tongue. The river isn't just water, it's boundary itself. Homer called it terrible, Hesiod called it holy, and historians still argue whether ancient Greeks believed Styx was a real stream bubbling somewhere in Arcadia, or a myth born from the mist curling out of mountain caves. There is a waterfall in modern Greece near Mount Chelmos, called the Mavroneri, the Black Water, that locals once swore was Styx's earthly reflection. Scientists tested its chemistry and found traces of deadly minerals. So maybe, just maybe, the myth had a mineral core. As you crouch near the bank, the current doesn't move. It glides, mirror flat like oil. You toss in a pebble and expect ripples, but it swallows sound instead. The silence feels earned, like the hush in a library where every book tells the same story. Too late. Charon's boat creaks forward, carved from shadow and repetition. You step aboard. He doesn't speak. His eyes, small as coins, flick to your mouth. You remember the ancient funerary practice. One coin under the tongue or on the eyes to pay your passage. The coin wasn't just currency, it was cosmic respect. To forget it meant wandering the shore as a ghost who couldn't cross. A bureaucratic nightmare, really, an eternal waiting room. You might think the rich got better treatment, maybe a faster boat, but the Greeks were surprisingly egalitarian in death. The Styx didn't care if you were a king or a goat herder. You paid, you crossed, you vanished. Still, one tiny bit of fringe trivia. In some rural burials, archaeologists have found not coins, but little bits of pottery, painted gold. Faux fair. Maybe families were thrifty, or maybe it was symbolic, like sending your loved one into the afterlife with monopoly money and hoping Hades had a sense of humor. The boat slides forward. You don't feel motion so much as subtraction. The world above quietly erased behind you. The only sound is the faint drip from Charon's oar, tapping against something thicker than water. He doesn't need to steer. The river already knows its way. Now, as you drift, your mind flickers through the myths that began here. Every condemned soul you'll meet tonight, Sisyphus, Tantalus, Ixion, the Danaids, they all rode this same current, probably making small talk, probably regretting their life choices. Maybe one of them tried to ask for a refund. No luck. The river widens. On its far shore, you glimpse other currents twisting around it. 5 rivers, actually, in Greek lore. Styx for hatred, Acheron for sorrow, Lethe for forgetfulness, Phlegethon for fire, and Cocytus for lamentation. It's like an emotional map of the human condition drawn in liquid misery. Historians still argue whether these rivers were meant to be literal paths or psychological states of the dead. Some think they represent the stages of letting go. You hate, you grieve, you forget, you burn, you cry, and only then do you settle. The thought is oddly comforting. Maybe eternity is just therapy with worse lighting. As Karen rows, faint shapes pass beneath the surface. You swear you see faces, the souls of those who never got their coin, trapped in the current like static on an old TV. You feel a shiver, but also curiosity. Why did the Greeks imagine death as so bureaucratic, so rule-bound? Perhaps because life in their city-states was a maze of rituals, taxes, and civic duties. The afterlife was simply more of the same, except with better administration. You glance back at Charon. He still hasn't spoken. Maybe he's saving his voice for eternity. Ancient poets never described him smiling. He's the embodiment of routine, crossing after crossing, no day off, no promotions. A celestial DMV employee before there were DMVs. You kind of admire him. Some fringe storytellers later said that when heroes like Heracles or Orpheus came through, Charon tried to protest, but no one listened. Mortal or god, once you step onto his boat, you've agreed to the terms. A one-way ride, no refunds, no exceptions. Yet somehow, a few clever travelers made it back. Proof that rules, even divine ones, bend for narrative convenience. The current slows. Ahead looms the gate of Hades, dark as unlit obsidian. Charon halts the boat and gestures silently. You're expected to step off. There's no welcome committee, just the rustle of unseen wings and the faint scent of pomegranate. Somewhere behind those gates waits everything the living fear, monotony, judgment, memory that never fades. Before you go, you glance once more at the river. The surface seems to whisper, not words, but a feeling. It says, cross enough times, and even death gets boring. You almost laugh. Maybe the ancient poets invented these punishments not to scare people, but to explain the dull ache of being alive, the part that never quite ends. You step forward. The stone beneath your feet is cold, patient, waiting for you to understand that this isn't a nightmare, it's just forever in slow motion. The gate waits, enormous and indifferent, its iron-black surface rippling faintly as if it breathes. You stand before it, half expecting a guard, half hoping there isn't one. The Greeks called this threshold the entrance to Hades, though entrance feels too optimistic. It's more like a revolving door that only spins one way. The scent of damp soil mingles with something metallic, maybe bronze or forgotten prayers. The air shifts. A low growl rolls out of the darkness, then multiplies. 1, 2, 3 throats, harmonizing in hunger. You've arrived at the first real obstacle of the underworld. Cerberus, the 3-headed guardian. The dog's fur bristles like black reeds, and each of his faces watches a different direction. Past, present, and whatever comes after. You might think 3 heads means triple intelligence, but ancient poets disagreed. Some described him as a slobbering beast, others as an oddly polite customs officer of souls. Historians still argue whether Cerberus was purely monstrous or a symbol of the mind's triple vigilance: reason, instinct, and memory keeping each other in check. You shift your weight and try not to make eye contact. Any of them. Cerberus sniffs, tail thumping like a slow drum. You could try bribing him with honey cakes, as Orpheus once did. The Greeks loved food offerings. Even dogs of the dead appreciated snacks. According to fringe mythologists, some mystery cults actually tossed bits of honey and barley into tombs as dog treats for the soul's escort. Whether that's poetic metaphor or literal belief, nobody knows. Archaeologists have found strange crumbs in ancient graves, though, so maybe there's truth behind the snack theory. You whisper to yourself, "Good boy," and somehow the middle head yawns, bored, exposing teeth that look carved from stalactites. Maybe eternity is as dull for him as it will be for everyone else here. Guarding gates that no one really escapes must get repetitive. The Greeks weren't cruel in their imagination. They just loved routine, especially cosmic routine. You pass under his gaze and the temperature drops. Not the chill of night, but the absence of seasons. The ground becomes smoother, the air denser. Shadows collect around you like polite attendants, forming corridors of half-light. Somewhere deeper, you hear the faint clang of distant labor. Someone rolling, someone weeping, someone arguing with fate's voicemail system. You think about how the Greeks divided this place. Beyond the gate, the underworld split into regions, the asphodel meadows for the average dead, Elysium for the heroic few, and Tartarus for the truly condemned. It's bureaucracy again, with geography as judgment. Historians still debate whether Tartarus was originally separate from Hades entirely, a primordial pit below even the gods, or whether poets just needed an extra layer for dramatic tension. Hesiod wrote that a bronze anvil dropped from heaven would take 9 days to reach Earth, and 9 more to reach Tartarus. You imagine the anvil falling endlessly, humming through darkness like a slow elevator with no ding. You pass under an archway carved with names you can't read. The letters twitch, rearranging themselves into symbols that look almost familiar, like when you wake from a dream and think you remember the alphabet, but it's slightly wrong. You realize that even language might start to erode here. That's part of the punishment, maybe, the slow forgetting of context. In the world above, you could explain yourself. Down here, everything is interpretation. To your left, a figure leans against the wall, half transparent. He murmurs that he's been waiting centuries for someone to tell him if the Trojan War ever ended. You nod sympathetically. "It's complicated," you whisper, and move on. Another whisper. "Tell me the date." You hesitate. "Doesn't matter here." The ghost sighs. "Then I've been right all along." The deeper you go, the more the underworld feels like an old government building. Corridors looping back, doors leading nowhere, the faint smell of bureaucracy and despair. And in a strange way, comfort, because at least there are rules. Modern historians point out that Greek afterlife imagery probably evolved from ancient Mesopotamian and Minoan influences. Those older cultures had shadowlands too, gray places where everyone ended up regardless of moral scorecards. The Greeks merely refined it with flair, judges, punishments, rivers, paperwork. Maybe it helped them process mortality through structure. We still do that, though we call it filing taxes or waiting on hold. You pause by a glowing niche in the wall. Inside, stacked coins glitter faintly, offerings. Every few centuries, the living remember the dead and send symbolic payments, a gesture across time. Some fringe scholars claim that certain temple rituals refreshed the dead's passage, renewing their spiritual visas. It's probably poetic exaggeration, but the thought of a yearly toll renewal is grimly funny. The Afterlife, sponsored by bureaucracy. A faint wind stirs behind you. When you turn, Cerberus is gone. Instead, the gate has sealed itself shut. You are officially checked in. Somewhere ahead, 3 faint torches mark paths branching in opposite directions. Left seems to hum with whispers, right glows faintly red, and straight ahead smells of wet stone. You pick straight ahead, neutral territory. The walls widen, and soon you find yourself in a massive cavern where shadows move like slow fish in deep water. Statues line the edges, heroes, kings, liars, all carved in poses of defiance or exhaustion. Some ancient authors said the souls here could see their earthly forms etched into stone, forever reminding them of who they were. Others said these statues were illusions, bait for vanity. Historians still argue whether the Greeks saw immortality as reward or punishment. After all, who wants to stare at their own sculpture for eternity? You pass one statue that looks suspiciously modern. Eyebrows raised, smirk eternal. Someone once scratched a note beneath it in ancient Greek. He thought he'd beat the system. No one does. In the distance, the cavern narrows into a tunnel that slopes downward. The stone slick like melted candle wax. Each step echoes too loudly, then too softly, as if sound itself is debating whether to follow you. Somewhere below, you hear the slow, rhythmic crunch of stone rolling. That sound will be your next companion. But for now, the tunnel winds tighter, spiraling like thought itself, and you feel the first real weight of the underworld pressing down. It's not just gravity. It's the sense that every decision you make here has already been made for you. You glance back one last time at the sealed gate, at the place where Cerberus once stood. The shadows ripple, forming what might be a grin. Welcome to Forever's lobby, it seems to say. Please take a number. The tunnel opens suddenly, spilling you into a cavern so vast it could hold the echo of every sigh ever uttered. The sound you heard earlier, the grinding, rhythmic scrape, grows louder until it becomes a heartbeat of stone. There, just ahead in the half-light, you see him, a man endlessly pushing a boulder up an incline that has no summit. Sisyphus, king of Corinth, con artist extraordinaire, and arguably the original overachiever of futility. His muscles strain, veins like marble cords. Sweat, glistening, even though the air here never changes temperature. The rock itself gleams with a cruel shine, as if polished by centuries of disappointment. Every few seconds, the boulder slips, rolls backward, and settles with a sigh that could almost be relief. You step aside as it tumbles down again, brushing past like an enormous reminder of deadlines unmet. Sisyphus doesn't curse. He just wipes his hands and starts again. You can't tell if he's resigned or simply forgotten there's any alternative. Historians still argue whether his punishment was divine justice or cosmic irony. In myth, he outwitted death twice. First, he tricked Thanatos, chaining the god of death himself so that no mortals could die. Imagine the chaos, soldiers fighting endlessly, old men sighing forever. The world clogged with the undead just trying to get some sleep. When Ares finally freed Thanatos, Sisyphus escaped his own arranged death again by convincing his wife not to bury him properly, then guilt-tripping Hades into letting him return to scold her. Naturally, he just never came back. Bureaucracy really hates loopholes. Eventually, Zeus had enough of the paperwork and sentenced him to this: a lifetime, or rather, afterlife, of meaningless exertion. A poetic justice, they said, a cosmic metaphor for the futility of deceit. But watching him now, you can't help noticing a strange calm in his repetition. The boulder gives him purpose, even if that purpose mocks him. You walk beside him for a moment, your steps syncing with his slow breathing. He glances at you, not angrily, not sadly, just with the polite interest of someone who hasn't had new company in millennia. "You from upstairs?" he asks, his voice a dry scrape. You nod. "Ah, don't rush," he says. "You'll get used to it." The rock slips again. It's hypnotic, the soft grunt, the roll, the chase, the push, like watching tides that never learn. Some philosophers later found beauty in this endless labor. You might remember Albert Camus calling Sisyphus the ultimate absurd hero, the man who finds meaning in futility simply by choosing to continue. If the underworld had philosophers' clubs, Sisyphus would be their president. Still, the Greeks weren't always so profound about it. Some fringe tales claim that Sisyphus's boulder occasionally changes shape, some days smaller, some days slippery, occasionally square, just to mess with him. The gods, it seems, have a sense of humor after all. There's even a lost fragment suggesting he once tried to carve a face on the rock for companionship. The face apparently rolled away mid-conversation. As you watch, you notice his path isn't a straight hill, but a spiral, looping upward around a hollow pit. Each turn feels like progress until you realize it leads right back to the start. Maybe that's the real genius of the punishment. It simulates hope. You wonder how long he's been here. Time doesn't count in the underworld, but myths stretch like chewing gum across centuries. The Greeks told his story for over 1,000 years, revising, retelling, each version making the rock a little heavier, the lesson a little clearer. Historians still argue whether Sisyphus was originally a trickster god demoted to mortal form, or just a particularly annoying king. Either way, his story outlived most of his contemporaries. You'd call that a win if he weren't perpetually losing. A gust of wind moves through the cavern, though there's no source for it. It smells faintly of earth after rain, reminding you of home. You realize how rarely you think of your own routines, the dishes, the commutes, the scrolling through feeds, as little Sisyphus moments. Maybe the myth survived not because it warned people, but because it understood them. Everyone pushes something uphill. Sisyphus pauses for breath and leans on the rock like an old friend. "You'll see the others soon," he mutters. Most folks think Tantalus has it worse, but at least he gets snacks. He gives a half smile, then starts pushing again. The rock moves reluctantly, like a cat being told to bathe. The sound it makes, a low rumble mixed with a sigh, fills the space around you. It's oddly comforting. You start to time your breathing to the rhythm. Push, roll, silence, push, roll, silence. Maybe eternity really is just good white noise. You notice something else. On the far wall of the cavern, carved in ancient letters, a message faintly glows. It reads, "Work is the memory of life." Scholars have puzzled over inscriptions like this for centuries. Some argue the phrase was added by later mystery cults who romanticized punishment as purification. Others think it's graffiti from visiting shades who couldn't resist editorializing eternity. Whatever its origin, the phrase lingers in your mind. Maybe these punishments weren't just retribution. They were the gods' strange way of keeping the universe balanced. You sin by excess in life. And you're balanced by monotony in death. It's not hell, it's accounting. A pebble rolls near your foot, startling you. You look down and realize it's a chip from Sisyphus's main boulder, smoothed perfectly round. You pick it up, and for a brief moment, it vibrates faintly, like it wants to rejoin the whole. You set it on a ledge and watch it roll itself away, merging back with its larger cousin as if magnetized. Everything returns, Sisyphus murmurs without looking at you. That's the rule. You nod. In a world that never changes, even rocks have loyalty. As you turn to leave, the sound fades behind you, stone scraping stone, the heartbeat of futility. You realize you could fall asleep to it, and maybe that's the point. It's less a punishment and more a lullaby for restless ambition. You glance back one last time. Sisyphus is already halfway up again, a silhouette framed by dim red light. The boulder shines like a moon that never rises. You step deeper into the tunnel beyond, where the air smells faintly of fruit and salt. Somewhere ahead a soft splash echoes, followed by the hollow sound of someone swallowing disappointment. Tantalus is waiting. You follow the scent of ripening fruit through a passage so long it feels like a memory stretched thin. The air grows humid, tinged with sweetness and decay, like an orchard left untended for centuries. The tunnel opens into a wide chamber filled with shallow water that glimmers under an unseen light. At first glance, it's beautiful. Trees heavy with figs and pears, pomegranates bursting with red jewels, branches dipping low enough to brush your hair. For 1 second, you think maybe you've reached a rare kindness in the underworld. Then you see him, Tantalus, the man who has everything except what he can touch. He stands knee-deep in the water, eyes fixed upward at a cluster of grapes just above his reach. Every time he stretches, the branch lifts just enough to mock him. When he bends to drink, the pool drains away until his lips meet dry stone. You can almost hear the gods chuckling somewhere in the bureaucratic background of Olympus. You watch in silence as he repeats the same hopeless choreography. Reach, retreat, thirst, despair. It's hypnotic, almost meditative. You could fall asleep just listening to the rustle of leaves that never feed him, the gentle slap of vanishing water. In life, Tantalus had been a favored guest of the gods, Zeus's dinner companion, if the old poets can be trusted. But flattery has a short shelf life on Mount Olympus. Depending on who tells it, his crime was stealing ambrosia, revealing divine secrets, or in the darkest version, serving up his own son at a feast to test the gods' omniscience. Historians still argue which version came first and whether the story was meant as moral horror or political satire. Either way, the gods found it tasteless, literally and metaphorically, and condemned him to this eternal half-meal. You wade closer, careful not to disturb the illusionary surface. Why stay in the water? You ask softly. Tantalus laughs, a dry, papery sound. Where else would I go? The air is worse. It smells of satisfaction. His voice carries the weight of someone who's been delivering the same line for centuries. You get the feeling he's forgotten how to improvise. The Greeks even gave us a word from his name, tantalize, to mean torment by temptation. You never thought the dictionary could sound like prophecy, but here you are, knee-deep in etymology. Some fringe scholars suggest that the myth of Tantalus began not as punishment, but as agricultural metaphor, the drought-stricken farmer reaching for rain, forever denied. Over time, the moral element grew around it like ivy, turning a natural tragedy into a cosmic lecture. You notice how perfectly the scene is balanced. Every fruit gleams, every drop of water shines with impossible clarity. The underworld doesn't rot, it just repeats. That's the cruelty. No decay, no relief, no ending. You wonder if, deep down, Tantalus still believes that one day the fruit might forget to rise, that the pool might forget to drain. Hope, after all, is the hardest habit to kill. He reaches again. The grapes lift, shimmering. Do you ever stop trying? You ask. Sometimes, he says, but the hunger starts to itch. The line hangs between you, heavier than the air. Maybe that's the real punishment, the hunger itself, not the denial. He could stop reaching and just stand still, but then he'd have nothing to define himself. Hunger gives him shape. You think about how ancient philosophers used Tantalus as a warning against hubris. Never pretend you're godly, or you'll end up with fruit you can't taste. But it's also a strangely modern image, isn't it? All of us scrolling endlessly, surrounded by abundance we can't touch, reaching for something that moves just out of reach. If Tantalus had Wi-Fi, he'd never notice his punishment. In the corner of the cavern, a faded mural still clings to the stone wall. You wipe away some dust and find painted scenes, banquets, golden cups, laughter around long tables. The colors barely cling to life, but you can make out the figures of gods with shining halos of gold leaf. A historian once proposed that such murals in ancient tombs were symbolic doorways, visual reminders that indulgence followed the soul even in death. Others argue they were warnings meant to keep mortals humble. The debate remains open, though the paint's not offering any hints. Tantalus sighs. I used to host dinners like that, he mutters. Fine wine, roasted lamb, all the good things. Now I can't even taste mist. You can't help asking the obvious. Do you regret it? He tilts his head, considering. Regret is a flavor too, he says finally. At least I still have that. You smile despite yourself. Somewhere, philosophers are scribbling notes for eternity. The water rises again, slow and deliberate. It laps against your ankles, cool as glass. You step back, but Tantalus doesn't move. He's watching the reflection of fruit above him. For a moment, the water holds still, and you see his face mirrored clearly. He looks content, almost human again. Then the surface breaks, and both image and illusion vanish. A ripple passes through the orchard, and you sense that the underworld approves of symmetry. One man condemned to push, another condemned to reach. Both performing for the gods' amusement, both teaching mortals that ambition has a ceiling. But you can't help wondering if the gods themselves ever got bored of the show. Historians still debate whether these myths were originally moral lessons or entertainment, cautionary tales, or divine soap operas. In ancient symposiums, people told these stories over wine, laughing at mortal foolishness between sips. Maybe the audience was supposed to chuckle knowingly, not tremble. You imagine some wealthy Athenian saying, "Ah, poor Tantalus. Anyway, pass the olives." The thought makes you grin. Down here, humor is the only rebellion left. The air shifts again. A breeze moves through the orchard, though you see no source. The fruits sway lazily, taunting their captive with eternal choreography. You feel sleep tugging at your edges, the repetition, the gentle water sounds, the predictable rhythm of denial. It's almost soothing. Before you leave, Tantalus looks at you with eyes too bright for despair. Tell them, he says quietly, tell them it's not the hunger that hurts, it's remembering the taste. You nod, though you're not sure who them is anymore. Maybe the living, maybe yourself. The tunnel ahead flickers with faint orange light, the kind that dances like fire on metal. You follow it, the sound of rippling water fading behind you. Somewhere deeper, something is turning, wheels grinding, sparks hissing. The air smells of smoke and pride. Ixion is waiting. The path curves downward again, heat seeping through the soles of your feet. The air hums with static, the kind that prickles the skin and makes every hair on your arm stand up. You smell iron and ozone, like a thunderstorm trapped in stone. Ahead, the tunnel widens into a circular chamber glowing red from within, and at its center spins a wheel, massive, flaming, impossibly fast. Bound to it, arms spread in a grotesque cruciform, is a man whose body turns endlessly through fire and smoke. Ixion. He's the kind of mythic figure who could make an HR department sweat. The first murderer in Greek myth to be offered a second chance by the gods, and the first to utterly ruin it. The story goes that he killed his father-in-law, tried to cover it up, and when society shunned him, Zeus, of all beings, decided to show mercy. The king of Olympus invited him to dinner, gave him a seat among immortals. And what did Ixion do? Tried to seduce Hera. You can almost hear an exasperated divine sigh echoing through history. Lightning cracks across the cavern, throwing sharp light on his face. His eyes roll past you every few seconds as he completes another rotation, a dizzying blur of flesh and flame. "You'd think I'd learn," he mutters, as the wheel brings him around again. But momentum's a habit. His voice is calm, as though he's discussing bad weather, not his eternal combustion. Historians still argue whether Ixion's myth was meant as political satire or religious warning. Some claim it mocked arrogant kings who thought themselves above divine order. Others suspect it was an early moral lesson about hospitality, Zeus offering forgiveness, only to be repaid with betrayal. Either way, Ixion's punishment is one of the more dramatic set pieces in the Underworld. Eternal motion, eternal friction, a cosmic lesson in the perils of misplaced passion. The wheel's spokes shimmer with an odd beauty, like sunbeams caught in liquid amber. You realize the flames don't actually consume him. They just burn without consequence. The way bad decisions feel when they're brand new. The smell isn't of burning flesh, but of overheated metal, a constant forge hammering pride into dust. You step closer, the heat brushing your skin. "Do you ever stop spinning?" you ask. He manages a smirk, no small feat while rotating. "Only when someone stops telling the story," he replies. "So, no." Some fringe sources claim the wheel is suspended between heaven and earth, spinning not underground, but in the air itself, forever visible, forever unreachable. Others picture it right where you stand, at the molten heart of the underworld. There's even a peculiar Roman retelling, where the flames are replaced by icy winds, as if punishment depended on local climate. Scholars still debate which version came first, or whether the Greeks borrowed imagery from Near Eastern myths of solar wheels and storm gods. Either way, you can't shake the feeling that his punishment was designed for spectacle, fire, motion, scandal. It's like an ancient tabloid headline. King tries to seduce goddess, lands fiery wheel contract. You walk around the chamber, following the blur of his orbit. Each time he passes, you catch a different expression: pain, amusement, resignation, curiosity. Somewhere between those flashes, he looks almost peaceful, like he's accepted the absurdity of his fate. "Does it hurt?" you ask, almost whispering. "Only when I remember why," he answers, voice breaking into a laugh that's half cough, half thunder. "But mostly it's just boring." That catches you off guard. Boring, his word, not yours. Even in torment, eternity finds its rhythm. You suppose even flames can become white noise after a few centuries? You sit on a nearby ledge, the rock warm but not unbearable. The wheel hums steadily, like a generator powering some ancient bureaucracy. You can't help but think of Sisyphus's rolling stone and Tantalus's retreating water. Everything here moves without progress. The gods seemed obsessed with perpetual motion, punishments that simulate work but produce nothing. Maybe they understood that stagnation would be too merciful. Ixion shouts above the hiss of fire, "Tell Hera I'm sorry." The next rotation he adds, "Actually don't. She'd hate that." Another spin later, "No, really. Tell her." His voice disappears into sparks. You can't help but chuckle. Even damned, he's still indecisive about women. A sudden gust whirls through the chamber, carrying the faint scent of rain. It shouldn't be possible down here, but then again, rules bend for symbolism. The flames dim slightly, and for the first time you can see his wheel's axle, a massive column of bronze etched with patterns that look suspiciously like constellations. You realize the wheel itself might represent the turning of the heavens, a cosmic punishment doubling as a mechanical metaphor. Some ancient astronomers even wrote that Ixion's wheel mirrored the zodiac, forever revolving but never choosing a house. "Do you ever see the stars from there?" you ask. "Sometimes," he says, voice softening. "Between spins, there's a moment, one blink of nothing, where I see sky instead of fire. I think that's the real punishment. A reminder that there's still beauty outside the circle." You let that sink in. The air around you vibrates with the hum of machinery older than morality. Maybe every punishment here hides a lesson if you can stand the repetition long enough to hear it. Historians still argue whether the story of Ixion was an original Greek invention or borrowed from pre-Hellenic sun worship myths. Some point to ancient wheels found in burial sites, small, decorative, possibly symbolic of the soul's endless journey. Others think the myth simply arose from watching cartwheels spin down dusty roads, mesmerizing in their constancy. The truth, as always, is probably lost somewhere between religion and daydream. The flames flare once more, bathing the chamber in golden light. You rise to leave, the heat pulsing against your back like a final warning. Ixion laughs again, wild, echoing, half mad, but oddly charming. "If you see Zeus," he calls, "tell him I've almost learned my lesson." You doubt it. The tunnel ahead flickers faintly blue. The sound changes too, the crackle of fire replaced by the soft splash of dripping water. You step away, feeling the temperature drop with each stride. The smell of smoke fades, replaced by something mineral and clean. A whisper follows you, carried on warm wind. Keep spinning. You shake it off and continue downward until the air cools completely. The walls grow pale and glisten like limestone, and faintly you begin to hear something else, the rhythmic slosh of liquid, the delicate clink of pottery, the sound of pouring that never fills. The Danaids are waiting. The flame-lit tunnel fades behind you, replaced by a soft, pearly glow that feels almost tranquil. The air smells faintly of clay, cool water, and the sweet dust of ancient earth. You follow the sound, steady splashes, sighs, and the rhythmic clatter of pottery tapping stone. When the corridor opens, you find yourself standing before a vast pit, lined with steps like an amphitheater. But instead of actors or spectators, there are women. Dozens of them, maybe 50. Each holds a jar nearly as tall as she is, and each jar leaks endlessly, no matter how carefully it's filled. The Danaids. They move like ghosts in a choreographed circle. Pour, spill, refill, repeat. The water glows faintly, trickling down their ankles and vanishing into cracks in the floor. No drain, no pool, no accumulation. Just the illusion of completion, forever undone. Their faces are serene, almost meditative, and that serenity is somehow more haunting than despair. You step down one of the terraces, your footsteps echoing softly between their measured motions. The nearest woman looks up as you pass. She's ageless, her eyes dark as wet soil. "You shouldn't linger here," she murmurs. "It's catching." You smile. "What's catching?" She tilts her jar, and a thin ribbon of water escapes through a crack. Hope. Her voice blends back into the rhythm of the others. The sound of their work becomes strangely hypnotic, the kind of slow repetition that could lull anyone into drowsy surrender. The myth says these are the 50 daughters of Danaus, condemned to fill leaking jars for eternity because on their wedding night they murdered their husbands. All but one, anyway. Hypermnestra spared hers, refusing to commit the crime. Historians still argue whether the story began as a moral parable about loyalty or a political allegory about ancient Argos, the city tied to their father's legend. Some suggest the myth grew from older fertility rituals, the leaking jars symbolizing the futility of wasted water, the curse of drought. Whatever its origin, the punishment fits neatly into the underworld's peculiar obsession with repetition. Here, futility is the final truth. Work without outcome, effort without applause. You think of Sisyphus pushing, Tantalus reaching, Ixion spinning, each one bound by motion. The Danaids add a softer note to that symphony, the whisper of water replacing the grind of stone. You crouch near one of the cracked jars. It's beautiful in its imperfection, etched with fading geometric patterns, worn smooth by countless refills. You can't help but admire the craftsmanship. "Do they ever mend?" you ask. A voice from above answers, "No, but we pretend they might." You look up to see another woman, taller, her hand steady as she pours. Her expression is peaceful, almost proud. The gods gave us cracks to measure time. Without them, how would we know the difference between now and forever? There's a strange comfort in her logic. Maybe futility feels less cruel when it's predictable. You wander among them, careful not to disrupt the pattern. Some hum softly under their breath, ancient melodies that rise and fall like waves. The sound reminds you of lullabies, of repetition's hidden kindness. There's even rhythm here, almost music, in the soft slap of water and the sighs of clay. A few steps away, a jar tips too far, spilling its entire contents before it reaches the pit. The woman holding it gasps, then laughs quietly. "Every time," she says, shaking her head. "You'd think I'd learn balance by now." "Maybe that's not the point," you suggest. She smiles. "Maybe the point is to keep spilling until it feels natural." You stand with her a moment, watching as she kneels to refill. The water seems to come from nowhere, bubbling up from the cracks beneath. Endless supply for endless loss. It's the underworld's version of sustainability in a way. Historians still debate whether the Danaids' punishment was collective justice or symbolic theater. Some early playwrights turned their story into a cautionary tale about family duty. Others emphasized rebellion, women rejecting forced marriages, punished not for murder, but for disobedience. You suspect truth hides somewhere between morality and myth, like a message written on water. A fringe theory once proposed that the jars weren't meant to hold water at all, but souls, tiny glowing orbs that leaked out with every pore, symbolizing humanity's inability to contain life itself. Romantic perhaps, but fitting. You can almost imagine each droplet carrying a flicker of consciousness, returning to the River Styx to start the cycle again. One of the Danaids begins to hum louder, and the others join in. The melody ripples through the chamber, a soft circular tune with no beginning or end. It's easy to drift with it, your breathing sinking to their rhythm. Pour, spill, breathe. Pour, spill, breathe. You think of all the modern parallels, emails answered only to multiply, laundry folded just to be unfolded, bills paid only to return. We've built our own underworlds above ground, disguised as productivity. If Sisyphus had a smartphone, this would be his ringtone. A droplet lands on your hand, cool, luminescent, leaving behind a faint shimmer that fades as quickly as it came. You look around, suddenly aware of how calm this place feels. Unlike the others, there's no pain here, no struggle against the inevitable, only quiet, repetitive grace. Maybe that's why the Danaids endure so well. Their punishment isn't agony, it's the slow acceptance of incompletion. Does it ever end? You ask one of them, though you already know the answer. She tilts her jar toward the crack and smiles. It does, for you. That line sinks into you, gentle as rain. You realize how comforting impermanence can sound when eternity hums softly around it. As you move toward the far side of the pit, a narrow tunnel glows faintly gold. You pause at its mouth and glance back. The women keep moving, their reflections wavering in the rippling floor, their song fading into distance. For the first time, you think of punishment not as cruelty, but as choreography, a pattern older than guilt. The tunnel ahead smells faintly of iron again, but cleaner this time, sharper. There's a distant cry, a sound not of pain, but defiance. You feel the air vibrate with energy that isn't despair exactly. It's something brighter. You're heading toward the Titan Prometheus, the one who gave fire to humankind and paid for it with his liver. The Danaid's song trails behind you like the whisper of a tide as you step into the warmth ahead, leaving the quiet futility of water for the brilliant defiance of flame. The warmth deepens with every step, wrapping around you like a heavy blanket. The tunnel narrows, the walls glowing orange as if they're lit from within. You hear the low crackle of fire before you see it, and then the chamber opens in a blaze of molten color, embers drifting in slow spirals through the smoky air. At first, it feels like stepping into a forge, but then you see him, Prometheus, the Titan who defied the gods and kindled humanity's first spark. He's chained to a massive rock face, his wrists bound by bronze cuffs that shimmer like freshly heated metal. His posture is regal even in restraint, chin lifted, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the flames. His punishment, you recall, is as endless as it is brutal. Every day an eagle comes to tear out his liver, and every night it regenerates, so the process can begin again. But now, the eagle is gone, maybe between shifts. And Prometheus sits in momentary peace. You approach cautiously, the stone warm beneath your feet. He glances at you, eyes bright as smoldering coals. "You're not the bird," he says, voice dry as ash. "No," you reply, "just passing through." "Good," he says, and leans back against his rock. "I've had enough company for several epochs." You almost laugh, but the sound feels too loud for this sacred heat. There's a grandeur to him, even chained, a presence that doesn't shrink under suffering. maybe that's why his myth still burns in every age. He's not just punished, he's proud. Historians still argue whether Prometheus's rebellion was altruistic or arrogant. Did he steal fire out of love for humankind? Or was it simply a challenge to Zeus's monopoly on power? The myths never quite agree. Some portray him as a teacher, the first philosopher, giving mortals light and craft and reason. Others cast him as the archetype of reckless defiance, the original rule-breaker whose generosity came with a side of ego. You sit on a nearby ledge, letting the warmth seep into your skin. Was it worth it? You ask. He grins faintly. Ask them, he says, nodding upward, meaning the living world. They still use the fire, don't they? You nod. Then yes, he says simply. It's strange how calm he is. You expected rage or remorse, but what you find instead is acceptance, not of guilt, but of consequence. It reminds you of Sisyphus's resigned push, the Danaid's serene repetition. Down here, resistance becomes rhythm. Prometheus tilts his head, listening. Somewhere far off, the cry of the eagle echoes faintly, followed by the rush of wings. Ah, he murmurs. Lunchtime. You tense, but he chuckles. Don't worry, it never hurts as much as the anticipation. Sure enough, a shadow sweeps across the chamber, and the enormous eagle descends, a monstrous shape of bronze feathers and obsidian talons. It lands beside him, hissing softly, eyes gleaming with divine boredom. You expect violence, but the act, when it comes, is almost routine. A few deft motions, a shimmer of blood that turns to light before it touches the ground. Prometheus winces, but doesn't cry out. The eagle takes its prize and flies off, leaving silence and faint sparks in its wake. When you look back, the wound is already closing, tissue glowing faintly as it reforms. Prometheus exhales and looks almost amused. It used to be worse, he says. At least now I know the script. Historians still debate whether this daily torment was meant as literal punishment or allegory, fire standing for knowledge, the eagle for divine censorship. Some think the Greeks imagined his liver as the seat of passion and willpower, so its endless removal symbolized the gods' attempt to weaken humanity's spirit. Others suggest it was just poetic anatomy. Livers sounded more tragic than spleens. You watch the healing light fade from his side and think about what fire means now. Comfort, invention, civilization. It feels unfair that the bringer of warmth should be bound in flame. Then again, myths thrive on irony. Prometheus notices your gaze and smiles wryly. They always focus on the pain, he says, but they forget what I learned from it. What's that? That gods don't invent meaning. We do. I stole fire, but they were never going to share it anyway. Someone had to take responsibility for wanting more. You realize that might be the most subversive line in all mythology. Wanting more, for knowledge, for creation, for autonomy. It's the original sin and the original spark. A gust of wind stirs the flames around you, carrying a shower of sparks up the tunnel. Prometheus follows them with his eyes. Once, he says softly, Heracles came to free me, broke the chains, shot the eagle, set me loose. For a while, I walked under the sun again, but freedom felt too light, so I came back. You frown. You chose this? He nods. What's a symbol without its suffering? A story needs its anchor. Besides, he adds with a grin, it's quieter here. The notion settles in your chest like an ember. Maybe that's the final twist. Eternity isn't always imposed. It's sometimes embraced. A small quake ripples through the floor, and the fire dims slightly. You glance toward the tunnel mouth. Prometheus waves you off. "Go on," he says. "You'll find the lovers next. They always draw the most attention." "The lovers?" He nods. "A poet and a ghost. He tried to cheat death with a song. You know the story. Orpheus and Eurydice, the man who walked into the underworld and almost got away with it. Before you leave, Prometheus calls out, 'Tell them fire still burns above, even when it flickers.' You nod and step toward the exit. The air cools quickly, smoke giving way to mist. The tunnel ahead glows faintly silver, like moonlight reflecting off distant water. You hear faint music, notes trembling in the dark, delicate as breath on glass. As the warmth of the forge fades behind you, the melody grows clearer. Each step pulls you closer to the sound of longing, of love stretched across impossible distance. The punishment of passion is over. The punishment of hesitation is about to begin. The tunnel softens into silence. No fire crackle, no dripping water, just the hush of air that feels alive with memory. You follow the sound of faint music winding through the dark. Each note trembles, pauses, and then finds its way again, fragile but determined. It's the kind of song that feels older than grief and newer than breath. The passage opens into a cavern the size of a cathedral, its walls rippling with light that isn't light at all, but vibration. Music turned visible. You realize you've stepped into the memory of Orpheus. He stands near the center, a slender figure cloaked in gray, holding a lyre that gleams faintly silver. The strings shimmer even though he hasn't touched them yet. His gaze is fixed on the faint outline of a woman just ahead, translucent as mist, her form shimmering with the rhythm of the tune. Eurydice. They're frozen in that eternal instant between love and loss. You know the story, but standing here makes it feel painfully alive. The greatest musician in myth descended to the underworld to retrieve his beloved, charming even Hades and Persephone with his song. They agreed to release her on one condition. He must not look back until both had reached the world above. Of course he did, and she vanished forever. Historians still argue whether Orpheus's failure was meant as tragedy or allegory. Some say it's about human doubt, the inability to trust happiness without proof. Others think it's about the danger of art, beauty powerful enough to move gods but powerless to save the artist himself. And a few fringe theorists insist it's simply a parable for sleep and waking, each glance backward a return to forgetting. The music fades into silence. Orpheus lowers the lyre and turns toward you, eyes dark as twilight. "You hear it too?" he asks. "Yes," you whisper. "It's beautiful." He smiles faintly, as if you've missed the point. "It's not a song," he says. "It's the sound of almost." You step closer. The air between you hums faintly electric. "You could stop playing," you suggest. He shakes his head. Then she disappears completely. Here, at least, she flickers. Eurydice doesn't speak, but her outline brightens briefly, like a lantern caught in fog. You wonder whether she hears the music or is the music, some echo sustained by his refusal to let go. There's a tenderness to the space, but also tension, the way silence hangs right before a heartbreak. You find yourself holding your breath, afraid that sound itself might disturb the fragile balance keeping her near. Orpheus plucks one string. The tone lingers, wrapping around the chamber like mist curling around stone. "Every time I play," he says, "I think maybe the story will end differently. Maybe I won't look back this time." "But you always do," you say softly. Of course, he replies. If I didn't, it wouldn't be love. It would be memory. You let that settle. Somewhere deep inside, it makes sense. The Greeks were good at that, turning inevitability into art. Historians still debate whether Orpheus truly came to the underworld out of devotion or arrogance. Was he trying to challenge death or just test the limits of his talent? Some later philosophers even argued he represents the artist's curse, to create beauty out of loss and thus to need loss forever. The Romans softened the myth, turning Orpheus into a symbol of pure love. Later poets romanticized him into the first emo songwriter. Either way, his audience has never stopped listening. You walk toward Eurydice. Her face shimmers, features barely visible. Does it hurt? You ask her quietly. She doesn't answer in words, but the faint sound of wind rises around you, half sigh, half melody. It feels like both yes and no. Orpheus turns slightly, though not all the way, careful to keep her in the corner of his sight. It's strange, he says. When you love someone enough to enter hell for them, you think you'll conquer fear. But love is made of fear. You can't tell one from the other anymore. You want to comfort him, but he's already beyond consolation. The underworld keeps him not as punishment, but as preservation. Down here he can play forever, and she can linger as long as he believes she does. Maybe eternity itself is just an echo of belief. He starts another song, slower this time, almost a lullaby. The melody drifts up and down like breathing, and the air turns soft, the kind of sound that makes your eyes grow heavy. Even the shadows lean closer to listen. Between verses, Orpheus looks up. They say I was torn apart by Maenads when I returned to the living world, he says casually. Maybe, but sometimes I think I never left. Then what's this place, you ask? He strums a chord that vibrates like truth. It's the moment between forgiveness and forgetting. That line lodges in your chest, heavy and perfect. You realize how much of the underworld isn't about punishment at all. It's about pauses. The space between what was and what can't be again. A faint tremor shakes the cavern, scattering motes of silver light. Eurydice fades slightly, her shape flickering. Orpheus stops playing. She's tired, he murmurs. Every time someone remembers us, she wakes up. Every time they forget, she sleeps. Right now, the world must be dreaming of us. You wonder who's dreaming. Some poet scribbling by candlelight, some listener drifting to sleep, maybe you. You're part of the chain that keeps her ghost alive. The light dims further. Orpheus stands and places his lyre beside a broken column. I'll walk her home again, he says, and turns toward the dark corridor beyond. His voice drifts back to you. Don't look behind you. It's addictive. You take his advice and start forward through a different tunnel, the echo of his song following you like a heartbeat. The melody softens until it becomes indistinguishable from silence, and the silence itself begins to hum. Historians still argue whether Orpheus's story ended in tragedy or transcendence. But down here, endings are just beginnings that forgot how to stop. Ahead, the air grows colder, more structured. You see the faint outlines of columns, the glint of scales, and the stern shape of seated figures waiting in judgment. The time for emotion is over. You're approaching the court of the dead, where even myths get their performance reviews. You step into a hall carved from darkness itself, its ceilings lost in shadow, and its floor gleaming like polished obsidian. The air here feels heavier, thicker, like it's made of verdicts and unfinished thoughts. 3 figures sit ahead upon thrones of differing heights, their faces calm, their eyes ancient and unreadable. You've arrived at the judgment of the dead. The first judge's voice cuts through the silence like measured thunder. Rhadamanthus, he says, introducing himself, though you didn't ask. His tone suggests it's for your benefit, not his. His hair gleams white as moonstone, and his robe seems woven from faint starlight. To his right sits Minos, stern and contemplative, the philosopher king of Crete turned cosmic administrator. On the left, Aeacus, older than both, his features carved deep with lines of patient authority. Together, they decide the fates of souls. No jury, no appeal, just finality disguised as calm procedure. You realize something unnerving. This courtroom doesn't echo. Sound lands softly here, as though even your voice has to pass a moral test before it dares bounce back. Rhadamanthus gestures, and a line of translucent shades appears beside you. They shuffle forward one by one, each clutching a faint shimmer, a memory, maybe, or a piece of their former life. The judges watch, weigh, and without speaking send them to one of 3 paths: the shadowy meadows of Asphodel, the glowing fields of Elysium, or the deep descent of Tartarus. It's efficient. Too efficient. You whisper, how do they know who deserves what? Rhadamanthus answers, without looking at you. They don't, he says simply. They feel it. Aeacus adds, memory is our only evidence. Minos leans forward, and memory lies. That last sentence hangs heavy. Historians still argue whether the Greeks actually believed in moral judgment after death, or if it was poetic metaphor for conscience. Justice as something carried within, not imposed from without. Plato later expanded the idea, turning these 3 judges into cosmic administrators of the soul. Yet earlier poets described them as bureaucrats of destiny, sorting shades like files in divine cabinets. You take a slow breath, careful not to sound guilty of anything in particular. The line of shades moves on, but the judges' gazes stay fixed on you now. You feel suddenly transparent, your every thought exposed like handwriting on glass. Visitor, Minos says, his voice low and deliberate, you've crossed rivers, gates, punishments, and griefs. Why have you come? You want to say curiosity, but the word feels inadequate. To understand, you manage. Aeacus chuckles. That's not allowed. Rhadamanthus nods once. Understanding is for the living. The dead only remember. Their words ripple through you like cold wind. Maybe that's why these souls never rest. They're drowning in their own recollections, unable to forget the details of how they got here. A faint murmur rises behind you. Another soul steps forward, a young woman clutching a laurel wreath. Her voice trembles. I was faithful, she says. I prayed. I gave offerings. Why Asphodel? Minos looks at her kindly. Because your faith was habit, not hope. The woman bows her head and vanishes into the gray corridor of mediocrity. The Asphodel meadows, you recall, were reserved for ordinary souls, those who had lived neither wickedly nor heroically. A kind of cosmic waiting room where eternity feels like background noise. A scholar once called it the place where nothing bad happens and nothing matters. You imagine entire fields of faint figures pacing in small circles, half content, half forgotten. Rhadamanthus turns back to you. Do you wish to be judged? Your throat tightens. I'm not dead. Then why do you walk among us? You hesitate, but before you can answer, Minos waves his hand, and the air itself ripples. A vision blooms beside you, a flickering mirror showing faces, moments, choices. Your life, or something like it, though distorted as if viewed through water. You see yourself hesitating at doors, holding grudges too long, laughing too rarely. Not sins, exactly, just small mortal failures. Aeacus studies your reflection. Not enough to condemn, he murmurs, but never enough to praise. Rhadamanthus leans back. Elysium would bore you. Minos tilts his head. Tartarus would sharpen you. You blink, unsure whether that's a compliment. Historians still debate how literal this triad was meant to be. Some say each judge represented a part of human nature. Rhadamanthus for reason, Aeacus for memory, Minos for doubt. Others think the Greeks simply liked symmetrical storytelling. Three kings turned into eternal arbiters, balancing order and chaos. A few even speculate that their judgment scenes inspired later religious notions of purgatory and divine trial. The chamber hums again, faintly, alive. In the background, you hear faint whispers, echoes of those already sentenced, murmuring their defense to no one who listens. The sound is eerily bureaucratic, like eternity processing paperwork. Can anyone appeal? You ask quietly. Aeacus chuckles. Only in stories. Heroes, Minos clarifies, sometimes get a second opinion. You think of Orpheus, Heracles, Theseus, all those mortals who dared descend and return. They didn't escape justice. They merely got temporary access to it. Maybe that's the ultimate privilege of being alive. You can still argue. Rhadamanthus stands, his eyes softening. Go, wanderer, he says. We've seen enough of the living for one epoch. Tell your kind that judgment isn't what they fear. It's what they crave. You bow slightly, unsure why. As you turn to leave, the floor seems to shift, and for a moment, the three judges appear less like kings and more like shadows cast by your own thoughts. The corridor ahead glows faintly green, and a cool wind stirs the air. The sound of bells, soft, dissonant, rings faintly from somewhere distant. You catch the faint scent of herbs and smoke, something wild and ungoverned. Hecate waits there, at the crossroads, torch in hand, the goddess of thresholds, witchcraft, and choices that never stay chosen. You glance back once at the silent judges, then step toward the flickering light ahead. The hall behind you dissolves into whispers and echoes, like a verdict fading into dream. The green light ahead grows brighter, almost phosphorescent, as the corridor widens into a crossroads that looks nothing like the others. Here, the air smells of night-blooming flowers and burnt offerings, of smoke twisted with sweetness. The ground beneath your feet changes texture, from cold stone to packed earth scattered with dried leaves that crunch softly under your steps. You can hear distant barking, whispers carried on wind that shouldn't exist down here, and the faint hiss of torches swaying in invisible hands. This is her domain, the crossroads of Hecate, goddess of liminal spaces, of thresholds and transitions, of everything that lives between the living and the dead. The Greeks said she could move freely between worlds, torch in one hand, key in the other. She never quite belonged to Olympus or the Underworld, but hovered at their border, a divine freelancer of shadows. When she appears, it's not in thunder or flame, but with the quiet authority of moonlight slipping across your skin. Her form flickers, sometimes three figures standing back to back, other times one shifting shape that you can't fully focus on. Her eyes, when they meet yours, seem to see everything at once, past, present, and possibility. Traveler, she says softly, her voice echoing threefold. You've crossed far without knowing why. You hesitate, then nod. That seems fair. A small smile curves her lips. They all come to me eventually, the ones who can't tell if they're dreaming or remembering. She lifts one of her torches, and its flame burns white, bright enough to outline the paths stretching away from her, one to darkness, one to mist, and one to faint starlight. Each road hums with a different tone. You realize that even the underworld has choices, though none of them lead back to simplicity. Historians still argue whether Hecate was originally a chthonic deity or a remnant of an older pre-Greek goddess, one who ruled the night before Zeus divided the cosmos. Some scholars trace her to Anatolia, others to Thrace. What's certain is that the Greeks never fully decided what she was: witch, guardian, mother, monster. She was all of them, depending on the storyteller. That ambiguity made her powerful. You say quietly, "They say you help witches." She tilts her head. "I help anyone who walks alone." The torchlight flickers, revealing small offerings at her feet: garlic, honey cakes, black dogs carved in stone. The ancient Athenians once left these tokens at crossroads during the new moon, believing Hecate roamed then, deciding which spirits to lead home and which to lose forever. A few still do, though now they call it folklore instead of worship. Some fringe folklorists claim the custom evolved into modern doorstep gifts during Halloween, the echo of ancient appeasement rituals repackaged as candy. You half smile at the thought that trick-or-treating might be her PR campaign. "Which way should I go?" you ask, studying the paths. She doesn't answer right away. Instead, she steps closer, her torch casting shadows that bend and stretch unnaturally. "You've already gone every way," she murmurs. "That's what travelers forget." You want to ask what she means, but her gaze fixes you in place. Behind her, the three paths shimmer and rearrange themselves, each showing flashes of the worlds you've already seen: Sisyphus straining, Tantalus reaching, Ixion burning, the Danaids pouring, Orpheus turning. The past is looping again, just in different lighting. "You keep searching for something to end," Hecate says, "but endings are for mortals who can't sit still." There's a tenderness in her tone, but also amusement. You realize she's the first being down here who doesn't seem bored. Maybe that's her secret. She doesn't punish or endure. She observes. Historians still debate whether Hecate was feared or revered. In some regions, she was a benevolent protector of households and childbirth. In others, she was invoked during necromantic rites, the goddess of restless spirits. Her worshippers met at three-way crossroads at midnight, lighting torches and whispering prayers for guidance or revenge. Even today, scholars can't decide if she was meant to comfort or terrify. Maybe, as she might say, it depends on what you bring to her crossroads. She gestures toward the starlit path. "That one leads upward," she says, "toward memory and surface dreams." "Home?" you ask, "if that's what you call it." You glance at the others. "And the dark one?" Her smile deepens. "That's for those who want to start over." "And the mist?" She steps back, letting the torches flare. "That's where forgotten stories go to rest." You find yourself drawn to that last one, the mist that curls like breath, soft and indefinite. You ask, "Which do you recommend?" Hecate laughs softly, the sound like wind over a grave. "Oh, I don't recommend. I illuminate." The humor in her voice feels like a kindness. She moves her torch in a slow circle, and the flame shifts color from white to blue to gold, each hue casting different memories on the walls. For a moment, you see flashes of your own world, city lights flickering like fireflies, the low hum of traffic, the glow of phone screens reflecting tired faces. You've built your own underworld above, she says, noticing your expression. All those little lights you worship, all those choices pretending to be freedom. You can't argue with her. Still, she continues, you listen. That means there's hope. Her three faces overlap for a moment, merging into one. She lifts both torches now, and the crossroads begins to dissolve, the paths melting into shadow. Go, she says, her voice echoing softly. There are punishments even the gods forgot. You might learn something from them. The flames dim to embers, leaving only her eyes, glowing faintly like twin stars in fog. Then she's gone. You're left standing in soft gray mist. The air is cool again, and the silence carries a different weight, less judgment, more curiosity. Shapes flicker at the edge of your vision, faces, fragments, half-told stories, forgotten sinners, perhaps. The path ahead narrows into a canyon of whispering stone, where each wall hums faintly, like a page trying to remember its words. You realize you're entering the archive of the underworld, the place where memory erases itself. It's time to meet the ones even myth forgot. The mist thickens until it's almost solid, curling around you like parchment smoke. The air here smells of dust and faint salt, as if time itself has begun to dissolve into the atmosphere. You walk slowly, each step stirring whispers that never form words. Then you begin to see them, faint outlines of figures lingering at the edges of visibility, their bodies half-formed, their faces blurred. These are the forgotten ones, the souls whose names slip through the cracks of memory. They watch you pass with the mild curiosity of ghosts who can't quite remember why they exist. Some reach out as if to ask for help, but their fingers dissolve into smoke before they make contact. It feels less like tragedy and more like absence, as though even sorrow requires identity and they've misplaced theirs. The Greeks, for all their obsession with eternity, feared this kind of death most, to be unremembered. Hades's worst punishment wasn't flame or torment, it was obscurity. Even Tartarus, with its wheels and stones and jars, offered permanence. But here, in this gray expanse, memory fades like ink under running water. A whisper brushes your ear. Do you remember me? You turn, but there's no one there, just a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising from stone. The voice repeats, softer now. Do you remember me? You shake your head, and the whisper sighs in disappointment before merging back into the mist. A historian once called this the second death of Greek myth, the vanishing point where myth itself forgets its characters. Many minor sinners or unlucky mortals mentioned once by poets simply disappeared in later retellings. Some scholars think this was an artistic choice. Others suggest it reflected how fragile oral memory was before written texts fixed it. Either way, these lost souls are the debris of narrative evolution. You walk deeper, and the mist parts to reveal faint scenes flickering on the cavern walls like half-played films. You see a man eternally brushing sand from a broken sundial. Another kneels before a dried fountain, endlessly adjusting a stone spout that never flows. A woman gathers feathers scattered by invisible wind, trying to reassemble wings that refuse to hold shape. Who were they? You whisper. A low voice answers from somewhere unseen. They were stories that didn't test well. You blink. Excuse me? The voice chuckles softly. Not every myth survives. Some sins were too dull, some morals too vague. The poets moved on, and so did belief. You follow the sound and find its source, a shape sitting cross-legged on a stone plinth, weaving thin threads of light. The figure's face flickers between man and woman, young and ancient. Call me Mnemos, they say, the name bending around your ears like music, keeper of what's almost forgotten. Are you a god? You ask. Mnemos shrugs. Once, perhaps. Or maybe I'm just what's left when memory gets tired. They hold up a thread, and you see images flicker within it, half-remembered tales. A sailor who mocked Poseidon and drowned before the story finished. A nymph who asked for invisibility and got too much of it. A sculptor who built statues so lifelike that even the gods lost track of who was real. These are the ones the poets dropped, Mnemos explains. Their punishments were creative, but not marketable. You stifle a laugh, though the humor tastes bitter. So even eternity has editors? Of course, they reply. History is a collaboration between truth and attention span. They toss a few threads into the air, and they dissolve like mist touched by dawn. You wonder how many thousands of names have already vanished that way. Historians still argue whether forgotten myths truly existed or were later inventions meant to fill gaps. Some believe oral traditions left countless local legends unrecorded, stories told by firelight that never reached Athens or Rome. Others think lost myths are an illusion, the product of our need to imagine completeness where none ever existed. But standing here, surrounded by echoes of unfinished stories, you sense that forgetting is as much a divine act as remembering. You notice small inscriptions carved into the floor. They're written in no script you recognize, a blend of Greek letters and dreamlike symbols. When you kneel to read one, it rearranges itself into meaning. To be remembered is to remain unfinished. The phrase feels true, though you can't explain why. Maybe memory keeps stories alive precisely because they never close neatly. Maybe that's why these lost souls fade. They've reached the end too completely. A soft glow appears ahead, a row of faint candles stretching into the distance, each flickering above a shallow pool. As you approach, you realize the pools are reflective, showing faces that aren't there in the room. You see a scholar's stern gaze, a child's half smile, a soldier's weary stare. They're all fragments, faces remembered by no one but the underworld itself. Mnemos steps beside you. They come back sometimes, they say, when someone up there dreams of them without knowing why. So they're never truly gone? They are, Mnemos says, but endings don't stay ended. They leak. You stare into one of the pools. The face looking back isn't your own. It's shifting through hundreds of others, blending until they become a mosaic of humanity itself. You feel dizzy, as if the underworld's gravity has changed direction. Mnemos touches your shoulder lightly. Don't look too long. Memory is contagious. You step back, the images dissolving into ripples. The candles flicker out one by one, leaving only the mist and Mnemos's faint glow. Where should I go next, you ask? Upward, Mnemos says, nodding toward a staircase carved from white stone that glimmers faintly in the gloom. There are visitors from your world who came down here once, the ones who couldn't resist peeking. Their stories survived better than most. You mean the heroes? Mnemos smiles, if you can call them that. You glance at the staircase, its steps wet with condensation, reflecting dim light like teeth. Behind you, the mist begins to close again, swallowing the forgotten ones back into anonymity. Their whispers fade until only one lingers, soft as breath. Remember me long enough to sleep. You promise silently that you will, even if you know you won't. Then you start to climb. Each step echoes faintly, as though the underworld is counting your progress. The air grows warmer, and somewhere above, you hear laughter, boisterous, arrogant, unmistakably human. The heroes are here. And if the myths were right, they've probably caused trouble already. The laughter grows louder as you climb, echoing down the staircase like the echo of a tavern in heaven, or more likely, the echo of hubris. The air shifts again, warmer, lighter, carrying the faint scent of olive oil and sweat. You emerge into a cavern that feels alive with noise and motion, the first place in the underworld that doesn't hum with resignation. Here, 3 mortals, Heracles, Theseus, and Odysseus, loiter like schoolboys who've sneaked into a faculty meeting. They are legends even in death, which makes their presence down here feel like the universe's inside joke. Heracles leans against a boulder, polishing the handle of his club. His shoulders are the size of temple columns, his smile faintly unrepentant. Theseus paces nearby, examining the walls with the casual arrogance of a man who believes every labyrinth is his. Odysseus sits on a stone, fiddling with a broken oar, looking amused and a little exhausted, as though he's already planning how to narrate this visit later. "So," Odysseus says when he notices you, "another tourist?" You nod. "Passing through." "Careful," Theseus warned, smirking. "That's what we said." Heracles chuckles, the sound booming through the chamber. "Speak for yourself. I came here on business." Of course he did. You remember his mythic labor, dragging Cerberus from Hades as part of his penance. Historians still argue whether this act symbolized conquering death or simply showcasing Zeus's favorite son's absurd work ethic. Either way, he succeeded, escorted the 3-headed dog to the surface, and returned him politely. Only Heracles could treat the underworld like a gym. "You know," Heracles says between grins, "they make it sound heroic, but really it was logistics. Getting Cerberus back down here without being bitten was the hard part." Theseus rolls his eyes. "You had divine permission. I, on the other hand, had curiosity." He means his infamous misadventure with Pirate House, when the 2 of them decided it would be hilarious to kidnap Persephone from Hades and make her Theseus's queen. Predictably, the plan went poorly. Both were captured and bound to chairs of forgetfulness until Heracles happened to stroll by centuries later and negotiated Theseus's release. Pirate House, as the myths say, remains seated to this day. "Lesson learned?" you ask. Theseus grins. "Never plan heists involving gods, my friend. The paperwork is endless." Odysseus laughs, tapping his oar against the stone. "At least you had company. When I came through, it was all ghosts and guilt. Tiresias this, Anticlea that. A family reunion without snacks." He's referring to his visit from Homer's Odyssey, when he sailed to the underworld to consult the prophet Tiresias about his way home. Some say he brought libations and blood sacrifices. Others suggest it was just poetic code for introspection. Historians still debate whether Odysseus literally traveled here or dreamed the journey. If it was metaphor for memory, the kind of descent we all take when we face our own past. Honestly, Odysseus says, I prefer to think it was a metaphor, much less paperwork. The 3 of them laugh, a sound so strange in this place that the walls themselves seem to relax. For once, eternity doesn't echo, it listens. You realize that, unlike Sisyphus or Tantalus, these men came by choice. They weren't condemned. They were curious. Maybe that's why their presence still hums with vitality. The Greeks loved their heroes precisely because they disobeyed boundaries. Hades was supposed to be final, yet mortals kept treating it like an optional side quest. Heracles leans towards you. You've met the punished ones, haven't you? You nod. He sighs. People think they're down here because they angered the gods, but really, they're here because they tried to do what gods do. Change the rules. That line feels heavier than the club resting on his shoulder. Theseus adds, or because they didn't know when to stop. Mortals are addicted to endings. We just don't know when to shut the book. Odysseus chuckles. Speak for yourself. I wrote my ending 3 times. They share another laugh, the kind that hides truth under humor. It's easy to forget that each of these men lived with ghosts long before they met them. Their stories are just variations on the same melody, bravery sung in the key of folly. A soft light flickers behind them, and for a moment you see shadows moving, familiar figures watching the heroes from afar. Perhaps the punished envy the remembered, even when remembrance carries its own weight. Do the gods ever visit, you ask? Heracles shrugs. Once in a while. Hades checks the locks. Persephone takes inventory. Hermes shows off new sandals. Mostly, though, we're unsupervised. Dangerous, Odysseus mutters. Delightful, Theseus corrects. You can't help but smile. Their energy is infectious. Yet under the banter lies something sad. They've all returned to the land of the living once, and each time it cost them part of their peace. These aren't punishments. They're consequences. The price of curiosity is repetition. Historians still argue whether heroes' descents to the underworld were meant as literal events or psychological allegories. Some say they mirrored initiation rites of mystery cults, symbolic deaths leading to spiritual rebirth. Others insist they were narrative devices to show mortals confronting mortality itself. Either way, these visits made the underworld not a place of horror, but of discovery. Every descent brought back knowledge, even if it also carried a curse. Odysseus looks up suddenly, as if hearing something only he can detect. They're calling us back, he says softly. Who, you ask? The storytellers, he replies. We only exist when they remember to tell us. You'll see how that works soon enough. The air trembles. The heroes' outlines blur, their laughter stretching into distant echoes. One by one, they fade into a shimmer of light until the cavern is empty again, just the scent of olive oil and the faint sound of waves retreating from an unseen shore. You stand alone, feeling oddly hollow. The space they occupied feels like the pause after applause, when the music's ended, but the vibration still hums in your chest. At the far end of the chamber, a narrow archway opens into another corridor, cooler, quieter. Its walls are covered with carvings not of Greek letters but of symbols you recognize from other cultures. Ankhs, cuneiform spirals, winged suns. The air here hums with foreign energy. You're leaving the Greek underworld, at least in spirit, and stepping into its cousins. The next room doesn't belong to Hades, but to humanity's shared obsession with what happens next. The river ahead flows not black, but silver. The echoes you hear are older than Olympus. It's time to compare eternities, to walk through other afterlives and see how they rhyme. The silver river glimmers as you approach, its surface neither water nor light, but something in between. It doesn't flow forward, it circulates, a gentle loop of time folded over itself. You step close enough to feel its mist on your skin, cool and electric like touching the edge of memory. The air smells faintly of papyrus and myrrh, of incense burned by hands that believed in eternity long before the Greeks named it. You've left Hades behind and entered the echo of other afterlives, worlds that dreamed their own punishments, their own versions of forever. The walls of this new cavern shift like pages turning, one moment painted with hieroglyphs, the next etched with cuneiform or star maps. As if the underworld itself is changing languages to accommodate you. A voice hums low in the distance, speaking not to you, but around you. It feels ancient, patient, older than the alphabet. The sound curls into words your mind somehow understands. Every culture invents its own sleep. You look into the river and see reflections morphing, Egyptian priests weighing hearts against feathers, Mesopotamian shadows trudging through dust, Norse warriors feasting endlessly in golden halls. They're all telling the same story with different props. The first reflection steadies. The Egyptian Duat, land of passage. You see the god Anubis, jackal-headed, guiding souls through caverns guarded by serpents and lakes of fire, not for punishment, but purification. The dead carry their hearts in their chests, yet also as offerings in their hands. Before them stands the scale of Ma'at, balanced by a single ostrich feather. If your heart weighs more, you're devoured by Amet, the crocodile-lion-hippo hybrid who eats sin like snacks. Historians still argue whether the Duat was literal geography or moral metaphor. Some ancient tomb texts describe maps of it, complete with directions for the soul, like a cosmic travel guide. Others think it was psychological, the mind sorting itself through symbols as it transitioned from life to light. You think of it as bureaucratic serenity. The Egyptians perfected eternity as administration. The reflection ripples and shifts. Now you're seeing Mesopotamia, and it's far bleaker. No feathers, no judgments, just the land of no return. The goddess Ereshkigal reigns there, silent and absolute. The souls shuffle like weary commuters wrapped in dust, sipping clay for drink. In their myth, even kings become servants. Gilgamesh came searching for immortality and left with the same lesson everyone learns. You can't hack eternity, it already owns you. The underworld sighs around you as the scene changes again, this time colder and wilder. You glimpse Hel, daughter of Loki, presiding over the Norse dead not chosen for Valhalla. Here, punishment isn't fire, it's monotony. No feasts, no glory, just an eternal gray winter of quiet waiting. The Viking poets wrote of it without judgment, just acceptance. Not every soul gets an ending worth singing about. It's strange. Every version of forever seems to say the same thing. Eternity is not about pain. It's about continuity. You start to realize that what the Greeks called punishment might simply be another word for repetition. You walk along the riverbank, and the surface ripples again, revealing fields of green and light, the Elysium of Roman poets. It's all sunshine and ease, yet it feels oddly empty, like a vacation that never ends. Even paradise becomes dull when you remove struggle. The souls recline on meadow grass, drinking wine that never runs out, laughing politely at jokes they've heard 1,000 times. You can almost hear one sigh. Yes, the golden age again. A smaller ripple appears beside it, showing Celtic Andubian, a world of mist and music. There's a king there, Aron, who rules not with torment, but hospitality. The souls hunt by moonlight, feast in endless cycles, die and rise again. It's less judgment, more rhythm, life on loop, tuned to softer frequencies. Historians still debate whether these cross-cultural similarities come from shared migration myths or universal human psychology. Some claim the Greeks borrowed the idea of rivers and gates from Egypt's duat. Others say the imagery arose naturally from humanity's fear of the horizon. The underworld, after all, is just the last landscape we can't map. The river flickers again, and now you see modern echoes, paintings, films, fever dreams. Dante walking through 9 circles that owe more to philosophy than faith. Milton's devils building pandemonium like architects of boredom. Modern novels turning hell into an office job with fluorescent lights. Each age remakes eternity in its own image, updating the decor but never the structure. You kneel beside the river. The mist curls around your fingers and whispers in languages you don't speak but somehow know. Sumerian, Sanskrit, maybe the sigh of atoms. You ask softly, which one is true? The water answers by showing you your own reflection, tired eyes, uncertain mouth, and then overlays it with all the others, Sisyphus's sweat, Tantalus's thirst, Ixion's fire, the Danaid's tears, then, unexpectedly, Prometheus's smirk, Orpheus's gaze, even Hecate's torchlight flickers across your face. Maybe truth isn't in choosing one version. Maybe it's realizing that every culture describes eternity not to understand death, but to soothe the living. A faint shape rises from the river, a woman in veils of light and shadow. Her voice blends with the sound of water. The Greeks were right about one thing, she murmurs. Punishment never ends because desire never ends. You try to speak, but the sound dissolves. She touches the river's surface, and the scene changes again. Flashes of modern life. Screens glowing in dark rooms, people scrolling endlessly, chasing novelty that always refills. You understand now? Our underworld didn't vanish. It moved online. Every age invents new eternities, she says. Yours just made them portable. The river quiets. The veiled woman fades, leaving only your reflection and the hum of silence. You feel the weight of all the myths pressing gently on you, not like punishment, but like gravity, the shared weight of wanting to know what comes next. Historians still argue whether these comparisons reveal cultural borrowing or coincidence, but the debate misses the point. Every myth maker, from priest to poet, reached into the same darkness and pulled out a story that sounded like home. You rise, your feet leaving faint prints in the dust. Ahead, the tunnel brightens. The silver river narrows into a trickle that winds upward, like thought returning to consciousness. You hear a faint, familiar rhythm, the heartbeat of words, the murmur of modern voices. Somewhere above, the myths are waking again, retold in classrooms, podcasts, and therapy sessions. The next chamber hums with those echoes. You're about to find out how these ancient punishments survived, not just in texts or temples, but in art, psychology, and the strange way we still see ourselves in the suffering of gods. The flames of Prometheus may have gone digital, but their light still burns. It's time to follow it up toward the modern descents, where eternity has learned to tweet. The silver thread of river dwindles into a line of light underfoot, guiding you through the mist as if tracing your thoughts. The air begins to change again, less mineral, more electric. You catch the faint hum of distant traffic, the low buzz of power lines, even the sterile hiss of a projector bulb warming up. Somehow, impossibly, you're walking upward through centuries, out of myth and into the modern mind. The path opens into a wide circular space. The walls glow faintly with moving images, paintings, book pages, flickering film reels. They loop in slow motion, overlapping. Dante's red spirals of Inferno, Rodin's tortured bronze bodies, a photograph of a therapist's couch under fluorescent light. The punishments haven't vanished. They've evolved. You step closer to one image, Dante Alighieri, pen in hand, eyes blazing with moral geometry. His circles of hell rise and fall around him like architectural blueprints. Every sinner catalogued, every sin assigned. Historians still argue whether his Divine Comedy was theological treatise or political roast. Either way, he took the Greeks' vague eternity and turned it into organized suffering. If Hades was a labyrinth, Dante built a bureaucracy. You move on, watching scenes shift. Michelangelo painting the Last Judgment, muscles writhing under divine light. Blake's Angels in Thunder, Goya's black paintings where even monsters look exhausted. Art kept the underworld alive not through fear, but fascination. We never stopped staring into the dark. We just brought better lighting. Then the wall changes again, becoming a sequence of books stacked into a glowing spiral. You recognize titles as they slide past: Goethe's Faust, Milton's Paradise Lost, Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. Each one retells the same transgression: knowledge stolen, pride punished, rebellion rebranded as enlightenment. Prometheus, you realize, never died. He just changed publishers. A whisper drifts through the chamber. We turned gods into metaphors because we couldn't handle the paperwork. You laugh quietly. It feels true. Modernity didn't abolish myth. It reissued it with new language. Freud called Hades the unconscious. Jung redrew its map with archetypes. Therapists today talk about shadow work as though it's a weekend internship in the underworld. Even psychologists borrow the old structure: descent, confrontation, return. The Greeks would nod approvingly, except maybe Sisyphus, who'd ask for a raise. One wall flickers into a montage of film clips: Orpheus in a tuxedo from Cocteau's surreal version, Hercules as an animated muscle man, Tantalus reimagined as consumer culture itself. Ad agencies still use his name for brands: thirst-quenching sodas, hunger-slaying snacks. No irony intended. Somewhere, Tantalus is laughing bitterly into the water that won't let him drink. Historians still debate whether this constant reappearance of myth shows cultural continuity or creative laziness. Some scholars say the archetypes persist because they describe emotional truths. Others argue it's simply brand recognition. Either way, you can't scroll 10 seconds online without bumping into a meme about Sisyphus at the gym or a Promethean startup promising to disrupt the heavens. You glance upward. The chamber's ceiling ripples into a planetarium of stars and satellites. A digital voice whispers advertisements in languages half familiar. The underworld has gone wireless. Every tragedy now streams in high definition. You can almost imagine Hecate's torches replaced by smartphone screens, illuminating sleepless faces at 3 a.m. A faint glow appears beside you. The ghost of Albert Camus, maybe, or just the echo of his words. "We must imagine Sisyphus happy," he murmurs, "but we never said we had to imagine him offline." You chuckle, then pause, realizing how absurdly accurate that sounds. The internet is humanity's new Tartarus. Endless scrolling, infinite repetition, punishment disguised as choice. Yet within it glows the same spark Prometheus stole, the fire of connection, curiosity, defiance. You walk further and find another vision. Salvador Dali's melting clocks drooping over desert plains. Time liquefies here, looping back on itself. Even art can't escape eternity. It only paints it in more vivid colors. You notice a plaque near the painting that reads, "Eternity begins when deadlines stop mattering." If the Danaids had this hanging in their workroom, maybe they'd have felt better about the leaks. A sudden breeze stirs, carrying the murmur of a museum crowd. The walls fade, and you find yourself standing in a modern gallery. People pass through you, oblivious. Tourists, students, someone whispering that the myths feel so relatable. They snap photos, update captions, tag locations. Our underworld vibes. The ancient punishments are now aesthetic experiences. You drift among them like a shadow, watching a child stare at a sculpture of Prometheus in chains. "Why doesn't he just quit?" the child asks. The parent hesitates, then replies, "Because he started something he believes in." It's not the wrong answer. You think about how we still punish ambition, how society alternates between praising rebels and crucifying them. Every century reinvents the underworld's moral. Don't reach too high, don't look too soon, don't forget humility. Yet the same culture that warns against pride sells self-help books about limitless potential. Even Hades would struggle to categorize that. On one wall, a projection loops a line from Nietzsche. If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. It's paired with a slideshow of selfies taken at volcanic craters. You can't decide if it's satire or prophecy. Historians still argue whether our fascination with myth shows nostalgia or need. Some claim modern humans cling to old stories because science, for all its brilliance, doesn't soothe existential insomnia. Others say myth never left. It just learned to wear Wi-Fi. The air hums gently as if the room itself were breathing. The lights dim and you see faint figures projected onto the floor. All the souls you met, Sisyphus rolling, Tantalus reaching, Ixion turning, the Danaids pouring. Their movements are slower now, stylized, almost balletic. A voice from hidden speakers whispers, "They are you." And somehow it feels right. We are the punished and the poets both, the pushers of stones and the storytellers who watch. Eternity, it seems, isn't underground anymore. It's internal. As the projections fade, a final image appears, a quiet field under soft blue twilight. A single doorway glows ahead, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The voice returns, "Go." The noise fades there. The story remembers itself. You walk toward it, leaving the gallery of modern myths behind. The floor turns from marble to dust again. The hum softens to silence, and the air grows cool. Ahead lies the final chamber, the one beyond art and punishment, where the myths themselves fall asleep. It smells faintly of rain on stone, of endings that have learned to whisper. You're nearing the last echo now, the quiet after punishment, where everything, including you, finally slows down. You step through the doorway, and the sound vanishes, utterly, completely. The silence isn't empty, it's thick, like warm water. The faint hum of the gallery fades behind you, replaced by something softer than absence. This is the end of descent, where even eternity exhales. The chamber you enter is small and circular, lit by a dim gray glow that seems to come from nowhere in particular. The walls breathe faintly, expanding and contracting as if alive, though it's possible that rhythm is only your pulse sinking to the stillness. A low mist curls across the floor, cool against your feet, and the faint scent of myrrh drifts through the air, familiar by now, the perfume of myth winding down. At first, you think the chamber is empty. Then you notice shapes at the edges, shadows reclining like sleepers. They're not distinct. They could be gods, heroes, poets, or maybe the echoes of all three. No chains, no fire, no labor, just stillness. The punishments have stopped. You feel the underworld itself slowing, like an old clock winding down. The air has that peculiar hush you hear just before dawn, when night realizes it's about to lose. You stand there for a while, waiting for someone, or something, to speak. But the only sound is your breathing, and it's enough. It occurs to you that you've met everyone who defined eternity by motion. Sisyphus with his stone, Tantalus with his reach, Ixion spinning, the Danaids pouring, Prometheus burning, even Orpheus, endlessly walking the line between faith and doubt. They all moved, none of them rested, and now you see why. Movement was the myth's way of imitating life. The Greeks feared stagnation even more than death. To stop was to be forgotten, to vanish like the shades you saw among Mnemos's mists. Yet here, in this still chamber, stillness doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like release. The boulder is at rest. The thirst is quiet. The wheel has stopped turning. You take a seat on the smooth floor. It's pleasantly cool, grounding. Somewhere above, faint light ripples through cracks in the ceiling, as though the world above is breathing in sync. You remember Hecate's words. Endings are for mortals who can't sit still. Maybe she was right. Maybe the underworld wasn't about torment, but about teaching stillness through repetition, until the soul learned to stop asking, what next? Historians still argue whether the Greek afterlife was ever meant to be moral at all. Some say it was a reflection of civic duty, the dead maintaining cosmic order the way citizens maintained law. Others claim it was just the Greeks' poetic way of explaining entropy. Everything that moves will one day slow. Even myth burns out eventually. A faint shimmer appears in front of you. At first it looks like smoke, then it sharpens into images, glimpses of the souls you met, but gentler now. Sisyphus, sitting beside his boulder, tracing lazy circles in the dust. Tantalus reclining, letting fruit fall freely at last. Ixion stepping off his wheel and laughing, dizzy with relief. The Danaids watching their jars finally fill, water pooling at their feet. Prometheus, unchained, sitting beside his own extinguished fire, hands open, content. Even Orpheus, walking forward without glancing back, Eurydice beside him like a shadow turned solid. No one speaks, yet you feel their thoughts like a tide. There's no triumph here, no redemption speech, just quiet understanding. You realize the myths never promise salvation. They promise continuity. And in continuity, even punishment becomes peace. A voice, calm, unhurried, rises from somewhere unseen. You wanted to know how forever feels, it says. Now you do. You whisper, it's quiet. Yes, the voice replies, almost smiling. Forever always ends that way. You close your eyes. In the darkness, you sense the underworld folding inward, not collapsing but resting, like a heartbeat easing after exertion. You think of rivers slowing, fires dimming, stones cooling. You think of the ancient poets, Hesiod, Homer, Euripides, each scribbling by candlelight, never realizing their words would one day become lullabies for sleepless strangers. Maybe that's the secret of these boring myths. They aren't warnings. They're sedatives. Repetition soothes. Predictability heals. Even eternity can be a comfort when it finally stops arguing with itself. You lie back and let the stone cradle you. The air hums faintly, the same deep tone that's followed you since the Styx, the sound of time not passing. You think of how every culture has built its own version of this silence. Egyptian fields of peace, Norse meadows of gray, Buddhist nirvana, Christian heaven. All of them, in the end, are just metaphors for stillness. A tiny flicker of humor crosses your mind. If the gods could see humanity now, scrolling endlessly, maybe they'd call that the newest punishment, an infinity of tiny movements that mean nothing. Sisyphus would sympathize. You open your eyes, the mist is thinner now, and the walls fade into soft light. The river's glow from earlier has returned, tracing a thin silver circle around the room. You can't tell whether you're deep underground or floating just above sleep. The two feel identical. Something brushes past your ear, a whisper that might be your own thought. Every story ends in rest. You exhale slowly, the sound blending into the hush. The chamber breathes with you. For the first time, you feel no curiosity, no dread, just quiet acceptance. The myths don't need you to understand them. They only need you to listen until the rhythm slows enough to match your heartbeat. Then the light dims, the mist thickens, and everything, every punishment, every name, every echo, settles into a single soundless sigh. And in that final stillness, you drift. The air grows cooler, softer. The stories dissolve like breath on glass, leaving only the faint pulse of the river far below. You can almost hear the steady rhythm of it, the same calm current that carried every soul before you. It's not frightening anymore, it's comforting. Like the quiet hum of an old fan, the one you left running to fall asleep. You breathe deeper. Each inhale feels slower, rounder, easier. The images of the underworld fade into gray light, the kind that precedes morning. You imagine the gods themselves finally closing their eyes, Hades setting down his crown, Persephone laying a pomegranate on the table before stepping into the sunlight. Even the judges, the heroes, the punished, all of them fading gently into rest. Nothing moves here now. The stones are still. The rivers are quiet. You feel yourself slipping into that same rhythm, weightless and slow. If you listen carefully, you can hear the faint echoes of everything you've just witnessed. The roll of a stone, the splash of unreachable water, the flutter of a torch in wind. But they're distant now, tiny reminders that all stories, even endless ones, eventually learn how to sleep. So let the myths dim in your mind. Let them turn from fire to warmth, from echo to silence. Let your thoughts slow until they, too, find the gentle rhythm of forgetting. The underworld is no longer beneath you. It's behind you, folded away in the quiet. You've come full circle, from curiosity to calm.